No, I think that's a really good point that you just made because we'll never know. And it's easy to make the argument because the argument's obvious that even if Michigan gets lined up against Cincinnati, they lose the national championship game because Alabama and especially Georgia, of course, just appear to be flat out better. So I would never argue that Michigan was going to win the national championship if they had that 1-4 situation. But all three of us do know how situations change and confidence levels change and scenarios can change. And again, I would never make this argument, but it's worth at least mentioning, I think, that in that 1-4 matchup, Michigan's maybe a different team 10 or 12 days later playing a national championship game with not the deer in the headlights. This is our first time ever on the big stage of playing in a playoff game. No, we got a playoff win under our belts. Say they won that game, 31-17. And now we got confidence. We got mojo. We've done it. Okay, we're used to this. We know where we are. We know we belong. And now they've got a shot at the winner of the other game. I'm not going to in any way. Again, we watched Georgia play Michigan. Not argue that. But things do change. And I reminded somebody the other day, rematches, and this wouldn't have been a rematch, but just a different situation with the same two teams. Sometimes we just think that if one team beats another team, that it's obvious that they're better than them, like all the time. Anytime they would play, they're better than them. History tells us otherwise, though, that the rematch is, and I don't have the numbers in front of me. I don't know that anyone's gone through the numbers top to bottom, but if you look at bowl games in which teams had played during the regular season or postseason games versus a regular season matchup when that happens, or a conference championship game that was played in the regular season, I'd be willing to say, because I have measured this at times to look at, let's say, conference championship games, roughly half the time, 60% of the time, a team would get whipped, beaten down in the regular season, and you would think that they had no shot in the rematch, and they won the game.
Yeah, and I see where you're coming from, Mark. I mean, and we know it was clear that Georgia was a better football team last year, and it's no point of trying to adjudicate, what if this, what if that happened. I will say, matchup wise, Michigan would have been a better matchup for Alabama. I still think Alabama was a better football team last year, but Alabama's defense wasn't like Georgia's defense. I'll put it that way. You just never know what could have happened, right? But anyway. For this particular year, man, it's one of those things where, I mean, you can argue that this Michigan team, and I wasn't willing to say this earlier this year, but they may be better than they were last year. They're certainly different.
I think they absolutely are. I don't even think that's a stretch. I think that's, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think part of it comes with success, right? Like having the year, because last year they were coming off the COVID year and it was not a great year. So at this point last year, it was almost, I don't want to say it was a surprise, maybe to people outside of the Michigan program, that they were, undefeated at that point and kind of rolling, to whereas this year I feel like it's more of an expectation. Like we expected this. We expect to win this Saturday too. Like I'm sure they're not expecting a close ball game by any stretch. So I think sometimes having the success that you had the previous year, and a lot of these guys were on last year's roster. So to be able to continue that into this year, I think it changes things. Some guys start to play with more confidence. A guy like Cornelius Johnson, like I feel like, even though I still am hoping for a bit more from him, I think he's playing more confident this year than he did last year. I mean, a guy like Ronnie Bell wasn't playing at all last year with the injury in the first game. So, yeah, I definitely think Michigan is way better, this year, because I mean, you could make a case Michigan should be 2-1, maybe. Like I mean, you could make potentially that case.
If we look at any good college football team from one year to the next, they always seem like they're not going to be as good because obviously they're losing players going to the NFL, and we don't know how much the other players are going to improve and develop. But I'm with Des. I don't think there's any question this team's better. And you guys have talked about it in the past where when you've got superstars, maybe they get relied on too much. And that pass rush was going to come from Aiden and David Ajabo, and that's it. And it just seems like they can come from any direction now with all sorts of different layers of players. Daxton Hill was obviously a big loss, but they've made up for it. And on the offensive side, for as good as that offensive line was last year, the center from Virginia,
he's All-American.
Tommy.
Oh.
Yep.
I need the name in front of me to pronounce it correct. But he's a monster. He's a man. He's great. He's a great center. And the difference between Haskins and Corum was Haskins, tremendous player, did his job, really good at what he did. And I think it was just the security of Harbaugh knowing what he had with Haskins. And
Corum was more, Mark, he wasn't a home run threat. No,
yeah, exactly. He's not a home run threat, but you didn't know that Corum could be the 30 carry guy. Right. So Corum was an in-space guy, a periphery guy that we got the ball to in space and got his 12 carries. But now he's proven that his ceiling obviously higher than Haskins, and he can not only just be the guy in space, but he can be the workhorse. I think that's an upgrade.
Well, I'll argue, and this is not to bash Hassan Haskins. He had a really good career in Michigan, was a workhorse. But I'll argue both our running backs this year are better than Hassan Haskins.
Yeah.
Donovan Everett, especially when it's all said and done, because he's young, he's still getting better, will be a better player. I think we talked about, I think last week, Des, that we think that Donovan Everett can be better than both of those guys when it's all said and done. Mm-hmm. So, another thing too, guys, I think what you're seeing is, and I'll never forget, there's an image that went out that was all on social media where right after the Georgia-Michigan game in the playoff last year of, I believe it was Mike Morris, J.J. McCarthy, and I want to say Blake Corum, and they were all watching. It's like someone took a picture behind them. They were watching Georgia celebrate, just kind of on the sideline with their helmets in their hands. And I think what you're seeing this year is not only a team that's better, but a team that had a taste of being in a playoff, and they're legitimately hungry. Like, we were so close. And why would you not think that, right? Once you get in the playoff, you only have to win 2 games. 2 games, and you're a national champion. I feel like they genuinely, in that locker room, especially the leaders from that team, the Corums of the world, Mike Morris, J.J. McCarthy, Ronnie Bell, who didn't even get to play last year, but he was there, feel like they're going for a national championship. That's what they're going for. And I think they feel like they have a chance. And I will argue, based on how they're playing in the landscape of college football, and we'll talk about this more as we continue to get down to that time of the year, that they have a legitimate chance to win it all this year. And so I think from a week-to-week standpoint, they're not going to really have much drop-offs. You're going to see that tenacity and focus because they can taste it and they want to go for it all.